My sister stole my millionaire fiancé 6 years ago. The city outside my window hummed with the promise of a glorious spring, a symphony of blossoming trees and longer, sunnier days. Inside, my apartment was a whirlwind of tulle and lace, overflowing with wedding magazines and sample invitations. My own heart, it seemed, was humming in perfect harmony with the season. 3 months. Just 3 short months until I would walk down the aisle, a radiant bride, to marry Nathan, the man who had swept me off my feet, a brilliant and charming millionaire whose presence in my life felt like a dream come true. We had planned every detail meticulously, from the sprawling vineyard venue to the bespoke catering, envisioning a future filled with shared laughter, quiet evenings, and the kind of security I'd only ever dreamed of. I was utterly, completely, blissfully in love, and believed with every fiber of my being that he felt the same. The betrayal, when it struck, wasn't a slow burn or a creeping suspicion. It was a sudden, violent explosion, tearing through my perfectly constructed reality with the force of a bomb. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, a day that had begun like any other. I had planned a surprise visit to Nathan's office, a small gesture of affection, bringing him his favorite coffee and a pastry, just to break up the monotony of his busy day. His office, a sleek, glass-walled area high above the bustling city, was a place I felt increasingly comfortable in, a symbol of the shared future we were building. I rode the elevator up, a light-hearted hum on my lips, picturing the surprised smile that would spread across his face when he saw me. The reception area was unusually quiet, the assistant's desk empty. I decided to walk directly to Nathan's door, planning to sneak in and deliver my sweet surprise. His door was ajar, just a sliver, and a low murmur of voices, intimate and hushed, drifted out. A faint, sickening chill prickled my skin. It wasn't his usual loud, confident tone, nor the professional cadence of a business call. This was something else. A knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach, a cold dread that silenced the cheerful hum on my lips. I pushed the door open, slowly at first, then with a desperate, accelerating urgency that defied my trembling hands. The scene that unfolded before me froze the blood in my veins. There, in the opulent confines of Nathan's office, bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun, were Nathan and Stephanie. My sister, Stephanie. Her head was thrown back, her hair a cascade of dark waves, and Nathan was leaning over her, his hands tangled in her hair, his lips pressed against hers in a long, lingering, undeniably passionate kiss. Their bodies were pressed together, their embrace intimate, unmistakable. They were not just kissing. They were locked in a moment of undeniable, illicit desire, utterly lost in each other, oblivious to the world, and to me, standing frozen in the doorway. The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the polished marble floor with a sharp, echoing crash that seemed to reverberate through the sudden, horrified silence. Their heads snapped up, their eyes widening in shock, their bodies jolting apart as if struck by lightning. Nathan's face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of pure, panicked guilt. Stephanie's, usually so effortlessly charming, was a horrifying blend of terror and something else, a flicker of cold, unapologetic triumph that sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My heart, which moments before had been soaring with love and anticipation, now felt like a shattered fragment, splintering into a million pieces within my chest. The pain was immediate, searing, a raw agony that stole my breath. It wasn't just the sight of their betrayal. It was the realization that the man I was about to marry, the man I trusted implicitly, had been lying to me, orchestrating a cruel deception with my own sister. And Stephanie, my sister, the person who should have been my confidant, my ally, my maid of honor in just 3 months. The depth of their perfidy was unfathomable, a double betrayal that left me breathless and broken, standing amidst the shattered ceramic and spilled coffee, my future reduced to a pile of wreckage. The sound of that shattering coffee cup, followed by the sight of Nathan and Stephanie's panicked faces, was the final, deafening chord in the symphony of my ruined life. The immediate aftermath of catching them, of the brutal confrontation that followed, was a blur of raw, visceral pain. The wedding, meticulously planned, became an instant phantom, a ghost of a future that would never be. The engagement was broken, of course, swift and agonizing. Nathan, after a pathetic attempt at apology and damage control, quickly retreated into the polished confines of his millionaire world. Stephanie, my sister, simply vanished, her betrayal a gaping wound that cut deeper than Nathan's. The days that followed plunged me into a darkness I had never known. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a complete and utter devastation that permeated every fiber of my being. I slid into a deep, suffocating depression, a black hole of despair that swallowed my days whole. Waking up felt like a monumental effort, each breath an act of sheer will against the crushing weight of betrayal and loss. The world, once vibrant with the promise of Nathan and our shared future, now seemed devoid of color, muffled and distant. I stopped eating. Sleep became an elusive dream haunted by replays of that horrifying scene in Nathan's office, and the simplest tasks felt like insurmountable mountains. The impact rippled through every aspect of my life. My work, once a source of pride and distraction, became impossible to focus on. My mind, clouded by grief and a constant loop of their betrayal, couldn't concentrate, couldn't perform even the most basic duties. Deadlines were missed, calls went unanswered, and my productivity plummeted into the abyss. It was an inevitable, though still agonizing, consequence. I lost my job. The termination, delivered with polite but firm regret from my understanding manager, felt like another brick falling from the already crumbling structure of my life. Stripped of my partner, my future, and now my livelihood, I felt utterly, completely, and irrevocably devastated. There was a profound sense of humiliation, a burning shame that intensified the isolation of my grief. In this abyss, however, a lifeline emerged from an unexpected source. My mother. She had always been a complex figure in my life, her affections often elusive, her focus sometimes seemingly scattered. But in the wake of this unimaginable betrayal, she became my unwavering rock. She moved in with me, silently, effortlessly taking over the mundane tasks I could no longer manage. She cooked, cleaned, ran errands, and simply was there. She didn't offer platitudes or dismissive advice. Instead, she sat with me in the quiet darkness, holding my hand, letting me weep into her shoulder for hours without judgment or impatience. She brought me cups of tea, coaxed me to eat small bites of toast, and whispered reassurances that I would get through this, even when I didn't believe her. Her presence, her quiet, consistent support, was a stark contrast to the chaos of my shattered world, a solid foundation when everything else had crumbled. My relationship with my father, on the other hand, remained profoundly strained. He was a man of action, of logic, and he struggled deeply with the messy, irrational landscape of emotional pain. He offered practical advice, urged me to pull myself together, and seemed visibly uncomfortable with my prolonged grief. His discomfort translated into a distant politeness, a subtle awkwardness that made true connection impossible. He didn't know how to navigate the raw, visceral pain of betrayal, and his efforts to help felt superficial, leaving me feeling even more isolated in my suffering. The presence of his discomfort, the lack of his emotional embrace, was a quiet ache, a stark reminder of the limitations of our bond. But in the quiet solace of my mother's embrace, I found the strength to simply survive, day by agonizing day, in the ruins of a life that had been so cruelly, so unexpectedly, dismantled. The deep depression, the raw agony of betrayal, and the crushing weight of job loss had consumed me for weeks, leaving me a shadow of my former self. My mother's unwavering support had been a lifeline, but even her love couldn't mend the fundamental brokenness I felt in the place where my heart used to be. Every corner of my apartment, every street in my hometown, seemed to hold a ghost of Nathan, a haunting whisper of Stephanie's betrayal. I knew I couldn't heal, couldn't even begin to breathe again, if I remained steeped in the toxic memories that clung to every surface. A drastic change was needed, a complete overhaul of my surroundings, a physical distance from the wreckage of my past. The decision was swift, born of a desperate need for self-preservation. I would leave. I would cut ties with the place that had witnessed my downfall and seek refuge in anonymity. Chicago called to me, a vast, sprawling city with the promise of new beginnings, a place large enough to get lost in, to reinvent myself. The thought of starting over, terrifying as it was, also held a tiny flicker of hope, a whisper of a future unburdened by the ghosts of betrayal. I packed my life into boxes, a melancholic ritual of severing ties, and said my goodbyes to my mother, who, though sad to see me go, understood the desperate urgency in my eyes. My father, predictably, offered a stiff, awkward handshake and a mumbled platitude about new starts, his discomfort with emotional upheaval still a palpable barrier between us. The move itself was a blur of exhaustion and quiet determination. I found a small apartment in a bustling neighborhood, far from anything that reminded me of my old life. The relentless energy of the city, its constant hum of activity, became a strange kind of therapy. It was too loud, too busy, too alive for my grief to fully settle in and fester. I forced myself to walk, to explore, to engage with the newness of my surroundings, pushing past the inertia that still threatened to pull me back into the abyss. Within weeks, through a sheer act of will and the invaluable assistance of a distant college friend who had made a life here, I managed to secure a new job. It wasn't my dream career, but it was stable, challenging enough to demand my focus, and most importantly, it offered a new routine, a semblance of normalcy in a world that still felt fundamentally askew. I poured myself into the work, finding solace and productivity in the mundane tasks that didn't require emotional investment. Each successful project, each new connection I made with a colleague, was a small, incremental step towards rebuilding my confidence, a quiet victory in the ongoing battle against despair. Slowly, painfully, I began to build a new life. I found a small coffee shop that became my morning ritual, discovered a quiet park where I could read, and cautiously started to meet new people. The raw, searing pain of Nathan and Stephanie's betrayal began to dull, transforming into a scar, a constant ache, but no longer an open wound. The memories still surfaced, sharp and unexpected, but they no longer consumed me entirely. I learned to breathe again, to find moments of quiet contentment, to envision a future that didn't involve the life I had so tragically lost. For months after my move, the news reached me, not through a direct announcement, but through a casual mention from a well-meaning mutual acquaintance from my old life. Stephanie and Nathan got married. The words, delivered with a polite, almost apologetic tone, landed with less impact than they would have months prior. There was a dull throb in my chest, a familiar pang of what might have been, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of detachment. They were a part of a life I had left behind, a chapter that had closed, brutally, but definitively. Their wedding, once the epicenter of my future, was now just a distant echo, a faint ripple in a life that was finally, truly, becoming my OWNMY new life in Chicago, though still tinged with the quiet ache of past betrayals, was steadily taking shape. The pain of Nathan and Stephanie's treachery had dulled into a manageable throb, a faint scar on a healing heart. My job provided a welcome distraction, and the vibrant energy of the city gradually pulled me out of the depths of depression. I was learning to be content again, to find joy in small moments, and to cautiously explore the possibilities of a future built solely on my own terms. It was in this cautious, rebuilding phase that fate, with a subtle and unexpected twist, intervened. The annual industry conference arrived, a massive gathering of professionals that always felt overwhelming. I attended out of obligation, bracing myself for the endless networking and forced smiles. I was there to learn, to grow professionally, but certainly not expecting anything more. It was during a particularly dull panel discussion, tucked away in a back corner of the sprawling convention center, that I noticed him. He wasn't loud or flashy, nor did he command attention with an overt swagger. He simply sat, listening intently, his eyes thoughtful, a quiet presence in the bustling room. This was Zachary Foster, a prominent tech investor whose name I recognized from industry news. Our paths crossed later that day, almost by accident, over a forgotten plate of stale pastries at a coffee break. We struck up a conversation about the panel, then the industry, and then, surprisingly, about life beyond work. From the very first exchange, I felt an ease with Zachary that was both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. He was the complete opposite of Nathan in every conceivable way. Where Nathan had been polished and performative, Zachary was genuine, his words unvarnished, reflecting a refreshing honesty. Nathan had possessed a captivating charisma that often felt like a performance. Zachary's attentiveness was sincere, his gaze direct and engaged, making me feel truly seen, truly heard, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. With Nathan, there had always been an underlying current of self-interest, a subtle sense that his affections were conditional. Zachary, on the other hand, radiated an effortless supportive presence, a quiet strength that felt like a warm, protective embrace. He listened without judgment, offered insights without condescension, and simply existed in a way that felt entirely, wonderfully safe. Our initial encounters blossomed into a steadfast friendship. We met for coffee, for quiet dinners, our conversations stretching for hours as we explored everything from our careers to our deepest fears, our past heartbreaks, and our tentative hopes for the future. He learned about Nathan's betrayal, about Stephanie's complicity, and about the long road I'd traveled to find myself again. He listened with an empathy that never felt pitying, offering quiet validation and unwavering understanding. I, in turn, learned about his own struggles, his quiet resilience, and the deep integrity that underpinned his outward success. There was no pretense, no games, just a gradual, organic deepening of connection. The transition from friendship to something more profound was a slow, tender unfolding, as natural and inevitable as the changing seasons. It wasn't a sudden, passionate explosion like my relationship with Nathan had been, but a gentle, steady warmth that seeped into every corner of my being. A shared glance would linger a little longer, a casual touch would send a subtle thrill through me, and conversations would shift from the platonic to the intimate with an effortless grace. I found myself anticipating our time together with a lightness I hadn't felt in years, my heart slowly, cautiously, opening again. The past had left its scars, undeniable and deep, but with Zachary, I felt a new kind of healing, a quiet, profound realization that love, true love, could be built not on grand gestures or fleeting passions, but on genuine connection, unwavering support, and a quiet, authentic understanding. Our friendship gradually blossomed into love, a love that felt far more real, more grounded, and infinitely more precious than anything I had ever known. He wasn't just a partner. He was a true companion, a safe harbor in a world that had once felt so turbulent. Our blossoming love with Zachary felt like a fragile, precious thing, carefully nurtured in the aftermath of so much wreckage. He was everything Nathan wasn't: kind, steady, genuinely supportive, and with him, I felt a sense of safety I hadn't known existed. Yet, despite the joy he brought into my life, the past lingered, a shadow sometimes, a raw nerve at others. The trauma of Nathan and Stephanie's betrayal, the public humiliation, the profound sense of being utterly broken, had left deep scars. I tried to compartmentalize it, to keep the ugliness locked away, but sometimes, especially when my guard was down, it would resurface with a terrifying force. It happened during one of our dates, a quiet evening at a new restaurant Zachary had discovered, its soft lighting and hushed atmosphere usually so soothing. We were laughing, sharing stories about our day, the kind of easy, comfortable banter that had become the hallmark of our relationship. Then, a song drifted faintly from the restaurant's speakers, a melody that, to anyone else, would have been unremarkable. But to me, it was a sudden, visceral trigger. It was a song Nathan and I had chosen for our wedding, a silly, sentimental piece that had once filled me with such profound hope. The memories, sharp and unbidden, flooded my mind. The tool, the invitations, the image of Nathan and Stephanie, locked in that illicit embrace in his office. A cold wave of panic washed over me, stealing the breath from my lungs. My chest tightened, my heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and the world around me seemed to tilt, the soft lights blurring, the murmurs of conversation fading into a distant roar. It was a full-blown panic attack, sudden and overwhelming, dragging me back into the terrifying vortex of past trauma. I gasped for air, clutching the edge of the table, my vision narrowing. Zachary, ever observant, immediately noticed the shift. His hand was on mine in an instant, his touch firm and grounding. "Karen," he asked, his voice low with concern, "are you okay? What's happening?" The carefully constructed dam holding back my past shattered. The words tumbled out, raw and uncontrolled, interspersed with ragged breaths and choked sobs. I told him everything. The engagement, the perfect future, the surprise visit to Nathan's office, and the horrifying sight of him and Stephanie, my own sister, kissing. I spoke of the cold ha-ha text, the emptied bank account, the financial ruin he thought he'd inflicted, and the subsequent, crushing depression that had stolen my job and my will to live. I laid bare the humiliation, the profound sense of worthlessness I had felt, the agony of a double betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. It was a torrent of pain, unleashed after months of careful suppression, and Zachary listened through it all, his grip on my hand unwavering, his gaze steady, filled with a quiet understanding that didn't feel like pity. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer facile reassurances, but simply bore witness to my unraveling, his presence a silent, powerful anchor. When my sobs finally subsided, leaving me weak and spent, he squeezed my hand gently. His eyes were soft, empathetic, reflecting a shared depth of understanding I hadn't expected. "Thank you for trusting me with that, Karen," he said, his voice quiet. He took a deep breath, and then, slowly, he began to share his own story, a chapter of his life he had rarely spoken of. He spoke of his own profound heartbreak, a betrayal that echoed mine with startling similarities. His ex-wife, he revealed, had not only been his life partner, but his business partner in the early, vulnerable days of his tech startup. She had secretly embezzled funds from their joint venture, diverting significant amounts of capital to a hidden account, systematically undermining the very foundation of their shared dreams and financial future. The discovery had been devastating, not just financially, but emotionally, a betrayal that intertwined love and ambition in a brutal knot. It nearly ruined me, he confessed, his voice tinged with the lingering pain of that memory. Not just the money, but the trust, the feeling that the person closest to you could betray you so fundamentally. His vulnerability, his willingness to share his own profound wound, created an immediate, powerful bond between us. We were two survivors, scarred by similar betrayals, now finding solace and understanding in the shared landscape of our healing hearts. His story wasn't just a revelation. It was a profound testament to his genuine nature, his empathy, and the depth of his capacity for understanding. The quiet confession of our past heartbreaks had forged an unbreakable bond between Zachary and me, a shared understanding that ran deeper than any casual affection. With him, the raw edges of my trauma slowly began to smooth, the constant throb of betrayal softening into a distant ache. His unwavering support, his gentle strength, and his genuine, unvarnished honesty were the healing balm my soul had craved. Life in Chicago, once a refuge from pain, transformed into a vibrant landscape of new beginnings, colored by the steady, comforting presence of his love. A year after I had first arrived in this sprawling city, a year since I had fled the wreckage of my old life, my professional world, too, began to flourish. My dedication, honed by the necessity of rebuilding everything from scratch, was finally recognized. I received a significant promotion at work, a testament to the long hours, the meticulous effort, and the sheer grit I had poured into my career. It wasn't just a title change. It was a powerful affirmation of my resilience, a concrete symbol of how far I had come from the devastated, unemployed woman who had arrived on Chicago's doorstep. The achievement, once something I would have longed to share with my old family, now felt entirely my own, a private triumph shared with Zachary and the new, supportive network of colleagues and friends I had cultivated. And then, one crisp autumn evening, under the soft glow of city lights, Zachary asked me to marry him. It wasn't a grand, ostentatious proposal like Nathan's had been, but a quiet, heartfelt moment, steeped in sincerity and genuine emotion. He spoke of partnership, of trust, of building a future rooted in mutual respect and unwavering support. My heart, once shattered, felt whole again, overflowing with a profound sense of new happiness. There was no hesitation, no doubt. My yes was immediate, firm, and filled with a quiet joy that transcended anything I had ever felt before. The thought of marrying Zachary filled me not with the glittering excitement of a fairy tale, but with the deep, quiet contentment of finding my true home, my true partner. We decided on a small wedding, an intimate affair devoid of the lavish extravagance that had characterized my previous, aborted plans with Nathan. We wanted it to be about us, about the genuine connection we shared, surrounded by those who truly loved and supported us. There would be no sprawling guest lists, no elaborate performances for public consumption. Just heartfelt vows, good food, and the quiet joy of beginning our lives together, truly, authentically. As the wedding planning commenced, a sense of duty, or perhaps a lingering hope for a different kind of closure, prompted me to extend an invitation to my sister. The envelope, addressed to Stephanie, felt heavy in my hand. It was a gesture of cautious outreach, an acknowledgement of our shared past, a final, quiet test of whether there was any bridge left to rebuild. A few days later, a brief, impersonal text message arrived. Stephanie declined. There was no explanation, no apology, no pretense of regret. Just a stark refusal. The message was a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. The chasm between us remained, deep and unbridgeable. And in a strange way, that final, definitive rejection brought its own kind of peace. My future with Zachary was clear, unburdened by the ghosts of the past, free to flourish in the light of genuine love and unwavering trust. My new happiness, built on authentic connection, felt more real, more precious, precisely because it was entirely my own, shaped by my choices and unburdened by the echoes of former betrayals. 2 years into my incredibly fulfilling marriage with Zachary, a quiet, profound happiness had settled into my life. The wounds of the past were largely healed, replaced by a deep sense of peace and the vibrant reality of a love built on trust and mutual respect. My career was thriving, my friendships were strong, and the occasional, tentative outreach from my parents and Jason suggested a fragile truce, a path towards a different, more honest relationship. Then, the universe, in its cruel and unpredictable way, delivered another devastating blow. It started subtly, with a persistent cough, a tiredness my mother dismissed as just getting older. But the symptoms escalated quickly, terrifyingly. A doctor's visit, a series of urgent tests, and then the chilling diagnosis that fractured our fragile peace: cancer. Aggressive, fast-moving, and already advanced. The news hit me with a visceral shock that echoed the despair of Emily's death, a cold wave of fear washing over me. My mother, who had always seemed so indomitable, so stubbornly resilient, suddenly looked frail, her eyes wide with a fear I had rarely seen. Without a moment's hesitation, I applied for a leave of absence from my job. My career, important as it was, paled in comparison to the urgent need to be with my mother. Zachary, true to his nature, was incredibly supportive, encouraging me to take as much time as I needed, offering to manage everything at home. I moved back into my childhood home, transforming it into a quiet sanctuary for her final months. The days blurred into a grueling routine of doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and the quiet, heartbreaking vigil of watching her strength fade. My father, surprisingly, stepped up, his stoicism softened by grief and fear. Jason, too, was present, visiting regularly, his earlier remorse deepened by the imminent loss. In those quiet, shared moments of sorrow, a new kind of family dynamic began to form, one forged in vulnerability and mutual concern, stripped bare of past grievances. As the days dwindled and my mother's strength waned, her consciousness became fleeting, punctuated by moments of startling clarity. In one such moment, as the afternoon sun streamed through her bedroom window, illuminating the frail contours of her face, she squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Her eyes, clouded by illness, found mine, holding a desperate plea. Her voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible, but filled with an undeniable urgency that cut through the silence of the room. "Samantha," she rasped, her gaze flitting towards the door, as if expecting someone. "Stephanie, you have to try to reconcile before it's too late for all of us." The request hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history, with the raw, still aching wound of Stephanie's betrayal with Nathan. My sister, the one who had disappeared from my life after that devastating confrontation, who had declined my wedding invitation, who had chosen silence over accountability. My mother, on her deathbed, with what little energy she had left, was using her final breaths to ask for this. A whirlwind of emotions raged within me. Anger, sharp and sudden, that even now, on the brink of death, she was burdening me with this impossible task, this painful obligation. Resentment, for the years of favoritism towards Stephanie, the sister who had betrayed me so profoundly. But beneath it all, a deep, aching sadness for my mother herself, for her unspoken regrets, for the clear, desperate longing for her family to be whole again before she slipped away. Her eyes, pleading and vulnerable, held a depth of sorrow and a quiet, profound regret that transcended the pain Stephanie had caused me. It was a plea for peace, for closure, not just for herself, but for the fractured remnants of our family. The request was a bitter pill to swallow, an incredibly difficult demand, but coming from her, in that moment, it held an undeniable weight, a final, poignant wish that I knew, despite everything, I would have to consider. The path forward, already steeped in grief, had just become immeasurably more complicated. My mother's dying wish, her raspy plea for reconciliation with Stephanie, hung heavy in the air, a final, complex burden. I hadn't agreed, not explicitly, but the raw vulnerability in her eyes had undeniably stirred something within me. The remaining days of her life were a tender, somber vigil, marked by quiet conversations, unspoken goodbyes, and the profound sadness of watching a life fade. When she finally slipped away, the grief was overwhelming, but it was also tinged with a strange, bittersweet sense of peace. She was no longer suffering. The day of my mother's funeral was a blur of muted colors and hushed whispers. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the quiet murmur of condolences. Michael was, as always, my unwavering anchor, his hand a constant, comforting presence in mine. My father, visibly aged by grief, leaned heavily on Jason, who, to his credit, was a pillar of support throughout the service. The small church was filled with family and friends, a somber gathering reflecting the quiet dignity of my mother's life. It was just as the final hymns faded and people began to slowly file out of the pews that my eyes caught sight of them. Standing near the back, almost hesitantly, were Stephanie and Nathan. My stomach clenched, a familiar knot of dread tightening. I hadn't known if they would come, given the years of estrangement and the raw history between us. Stephanie was dressed in a sleek, black dress, her face carefully composed, a stark contrast to the genuine grief etched on the faces of others. Nathan, as always, looked impeccably polished, his presence radiating an almost arrogant confidence that felt utterly out of place in such a somber setting. Their appearance felt less like an act of respectful mourning and more like an intrusion, a calculated re-entry into a space they had long since abandoned. As people began to move towards the cemetery, a small procession forming, Stephanie broke away from Nathan, walking purposefully towards me. Her gaze swept over me, a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer touching her lips, lingering for a moment on my hand, which was still firmly clasped in Michael's. My heart pounded, bracing for the inevitable confrontation, the uncomfortable exchange of shallow pleasantries. She stopped directly in front of me, her smile a brittle, artificial thing. "Karen," she began, her voice a low, mocking murmur, loud enough for those nearby to overhear. She completely, deliberately, ignored Michael standing beside me, her eyes fixed on my face with a triumphant glint. "It's been a while. Still single, I see. Life treating you okay?" The words, delivered with such casual cruelty, were a deliberate jab, a calculated attempt to wound, to diminish me in the very public space of my mother's funeral. Still single. The implication was clear. I was still the broken woman she and Nathan had abandoned, alone and unloved, while they had moved on to their supposed perfect life. The audacity of her, standing there, at my mother's funeral, completely unaware of who my husband was breathtaking. She didn't recognize Michael, didn't acknowledge his presence, so consumed was she by her own distorted narrative, her own need to assert dominance. The casual dismissal, the petty cruelty, revealed the unchanging core of her character, even in the face of our shared grief. A quiet anger, cold and precise, began to bubble within me, pushing aside the raw sorrow of the moment. I felt Michael's hand tighten reassuringly in mine, a silent signal of his unwavering presence. I looked directly into Stephanie's cold, mocking eyes, a calm, almost serene smile touching my lips. The time for silent suffering, for enduring her casual disdain, was over. The cold mockery in Stephanie's voice, her deliberate dismissal of Michael, and her cruel taunt about me being still single at my mother's funeral had ignited a quiet, furious resolve within me. I felt Michael's comforting grip tighten on my hand, a silent signal of his unwavering support. My response to Stephanie was a calm, serene smile, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions churning inside me. This wasn't the time for a shouting match, not here, not now. But the opportunity for a more impactful revelation presented itself, one that would hit them where it truly hurt. Their inflated egos and Nathan's carefully constructed world of financial superiority. My gaze flickered from Stephanie's smug face to Nathan's equally self-assured demeanor, then back to Michael. A silent message passed between us, a shared understanding that needed no words. He simply nodded, a subtle confirmation. Taking a deep breath, I pulled my hand from Michael's for a moment, reached for my phone, and with deliberate calm, dialed Zachary. The phone rang only once before he answered, his voice low and concerned. "Karen, is everything all right?" he asked, sensing the unusual timing of my call. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I turned to Stephanie and Nathan, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my lips. "Stephanie," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmuring crowd that had started to gather, drawn by the palpable tension. "Nathan," their eyes, still filled with a mixture of defiance and curiosity, fixed on me. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." I held the phone out to Michael, who took it without a word, his own smile now mirroring mine, a quiet, almost predatory satisfaction in his eyes. "Zachary," Michael said into the phone, his voice suddenly commanding, authoritative. "They're here. I'm putting you on speaker." He pressed a button, and Zachary's voice, amplified and resonant, filled the air, cutting through the solemn quiet of the funeral gathering. "Karen, what's going on?" he asked, his tone still concerned. "Zachary," Michael replied, his voice firm. "I'd like you to formally introduce yourself to Stephanie and Nathan. They seem to be under the mistaken impression that Karen is still single." There was a brief pause on the other end, a beat of silence that felt charged with impending revelation. Then, Zachary's voice, calm, controlled, and utterly devastating, resonated from the phone's speaker. "Hello, Stephanie." "Hello, Nathan," he began, his tone polite, almost genial, yet laced with an undeniable edge. "My name is Zachary Foster. I'm Karen's husband." The impact of those words was immediate and visceral. Stephanie's jaw literally dropped, her carefully constructed composure shattering. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered from Michael to the phone, then to Nathan, who stood frozen, his face paling to an alarming shade of white. A ripple of gasps and shocked whispers spread through the small crowd of onlookers, relatives, and friends who had witnessed Stephanie's earlier taunt and were now witnessing this stunning rebuttal. But Zachary wasn't finished. His voice remained steady, each word a precisely aimed arrow. "And Nathan," he continued, a subtle shift in his tone, a cold precision that made my ex-fiancé visibly flinch. "It's been a while, hasn't it? I believe we last spoke when my company, Foster Innovations, acquired your little startup, Apex Solutions, effectively leading to its unfortunate bankruptcy." The words hung in the air like a sudden, fatal judgment. Nathan's face, already pale, now drained of all color, turning a ghastly shade of ashen gray. His eyes, fixed on the phone in Michael's hand, were wide with a horrifying realization. The smug millionaire, the man who had so confidently abandoned me, was now revealed to be a failure in the eyes of his most significant competitor, a failure engineered, directly or indirectly, by my own husband. The puzzle pieces clicked into place for everyone present. Zachary Foster, the tech titan whose company had risen meteorically in recent years, was not just my husband. He was Nathan's successful competitor in business. He was the very force that had engineered Nathan's professional downfall, the man whose company had bought out the struggling startup, leaving Nathan financially ruined. Stephanie, beside him, let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror at the true extent of the situation. The mockery, the condescension, the years of feeling inferior, all of it evaporated in that single, crushing moment. Nathan, my once millionaire ex-fiancé, the man who had abandoned me with a mocking ha-ha, after emptying a paltry joint account, stood exposed, professionally bankrupt, and publicly humiliated by the very man I had chosen to marry. The silence that followed was absolute, filled only with the faint sound of his labored breathing and the resounding echo of his shattered pride. The air in the funeral parlor, thick with the scent of lilies and the lingering shock of Zachary's revelation, finally began to clear. Nathan stood there, a ghost of his former arrogant self, his face ashen, his empire of lies and financial superiority having just crumbled around him. Stephanie, utterly stunned, seemed to shrink beside him. The humiliation was palpable, a bitter taste in the air that filled the space where sorrow had once reigned supreme. It wasn't the way I had envisioned a confrontation with them, but it was undeniably effective. As the last guests filtered out, leaving behind the quiet aftermath of grief and exposed truth, I felt a profound sense of closure, of victory not of malice, but of undeniable reality. Days turned into a week after the funeral, a period of quiet reflection and tentative rebuilding. My mother's diary, a small leather-bound book I found tucked away in her nightstand, became my solace. Its pages, filled with her elegant script, held not just daily musings but also glimpses into her private thoughts, her hidden struggles, and her hopes for her children. It was in these pages, particularly entries from the last few years, that I discovered a deeper, more nuanced understanding of her final, desperate plea for reconciliation with Stephanie. She had seen things, intuited unspoken truths about Stephanie's life with Nathan that I, from my distance, could not. One rainy afternoon, as I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, rereading her poignant entries, my phone buzzed. It was Stephanie. Her voice, when I answered, was hesitant, fragile, utterly devoid of the brittle confidence I had come to associate with her. "Karen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Can I come over? Please." The tremor in her voice, the genuine plea, was unfamiliar, disarming. I hesitated for a moment, the ghost of past betrayals rising, but the memory of my mother's dying wish and the quiet understanding I was gaining from her diary softened my resolve. "Yes," I said, "come." She arrived looking utterly drained, stripped of her usual polished veneer. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her shoulders slumped. She didn't offer excuses or immediate apologies. Instead, she spoke of Nathan, her voice low, almost a confession. His bankruptcy, the public humiliation at the funeral, had apparently been the final straw in a marriage that had, for a long time, been nothing but a facade. "It was never what it seemed," she admitted, her gaze fixed on her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He became controlling and cruel." The words tumbled out, a torrent of suppressed misery. She spoke of his explosive temper, his cutting remarks, his constant need for dominance. The man who had been the charismatic millionaire, the seemingly perfect catch, had, in private, become a tormentor. She confessed to living in constant fear of his outbursts, of the public image he meticulously maintained, and of the financial precariousness that had always lingered beneath his outward show of wealth. "I was planning to divorce him," she whispered, a raw vulnerability in her voice. I didn't know how. I was trapped. The revelation was stunning, turning my perception of their perfect life on its head. Her betrayal of me, it seemed, had been born not just of malice, but perhaps also of a desperate, misguided attempt to escape her own gilded cage. It wasn't an instant reconciliation. The years of hurt, the profound betrayal of my engagement, were not erased by a single confession. But it was a start. We sat for hours, talking, not about the past in a recriminatory way, but about her present struggles, her plans for escape, and the genuine fear that had driven her into such a toxic union. I offered her what I hadn't received from her years ago, a listening ear, a space free of judgment, and the quiet strength of my support. I watched as the rigid tension in her shoulders slowly eased, as a flicker of hope entered her tired eyes. The conversation was difficult, raw, and at times painful, but it was real, a genuine connection forged in shared vulnerability.